everybody, and welcome back to Beware the Artist. I am Jeremy Jersa, and with us this week on the show, we have Lee Nowell-Wilson. Lee, if you want to go ahead and tell everybody who you are and what is it that you do.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me. Super fun to listen to your show and be on it now, and really grateful for the opportunity. So for those that don't know me, I'm based in Baltimore, and I am traditionally trained as a painter, though I'm mostly working with drawing and predominantly drawing. I usually like to make it sound more aloof by saying I'm like drawing and painting and installation and that kind of stuff. But for right now, I'm super intrigued with the drawing aspect and just messing with a bunch of drawing materials. So for the most part, I am working with graphite and charcoal and masking with a bit of tape sometimes. I still approach it a lot like painting. So I'm laying in a lot of my shapes and forms, kind of like how I would a painting. So it's always this funny tension of like, do I say I'm a painter? Do I say I'm not a painter? But ultimately, fine artist based in Baltimore, working very figuratively. I've always been very interested in people and their faces and the figure and the figurative form. I am in some recent works. I am starting to there's an absence, there's no figure, an absent of the figure. But I would still technically consider that work figurative because it's very realistic and the objects in the pieces end up taking on a very figural form in themselves. Figurative artist, making work about motherhood.
So you started to tap into it. What themes are you exploring within these pieces?
So a little bit of history and context kind of would give the best picture. I've always been somebody that has used art, like most artists, I feel like, to process the world and how are things made and where do we come from, and I'm a preteen with all of these all of these feelings, or like I'm a kid trying to understand like, oh my gosh, like how is this flower made, or like, oh my gosh, like you just ever since you're 4, you're making all of these connections of how the world works and what's connected and how things are built, essentially. And I was totally one of those kids that was like, I gotta draw it, I see it and I want to capture it and I want to just like get it out on paper, and like me kind of like tackling it, like seeing it and then like re-tackling it and like reconstructing it on paper was always like how it made that final amount of sense in my brain. And so that has like continued all the way through. Like, I had some really huge stomach problems in high school, and like my art is how I process all of it. Like I did a lot of volunteer work and construction work down in Honduras through high school and college, and processing all of those stories that I came across was pretty much what my thesis at the Maryland Institute College of Art was about. Like it's just always been that processing tool, I guess. And so when I became a mom in 2017, my work on one hand took a huge like left turn, and on the other hand, it didn't. It's kind of this funny tension. Like essentially, I guess what I'm saying is that my work is very autobiographical, and it continues to be so. Like what I'm processing and experiencing in the world is what my art is going to depict, kind of thing. But then I'm one of those like stubborn artists that refuses to like send my kid to childcare when they can just come to the studio with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of just like, all right, like we're going to do this and you're going to be like my studio buddies and this is going to be great. And at the same time, I do not want you getting into my oil paint. So that was kind of like my first excuse to jump into playing with like all these drawing materials that I had wanted to play with for a really long time had stupid voices in my head telling me that drawing is like not as mature as painting, or like drawing is the preliminary step to painting. So I never allowed myself before having kids to actually explore the medium, which is
Interesting.
dumb.
Yeah.
So it was a great excuse. I have kids in the studio with me. I'm going to like jump into all of these drawing materials. And my daughter is about to be 4. And I like am starting to slightly crave, my oil painting days a little bit, because I definitely am a painter at heart. But I'm, for the most part, I'm still having a blast, like just like scratching at the surface, and then also like getting this like delicate velvet with the charcoal, like that huge contrast.
Hmm.
And so my materials changed, and then also the subject matter, like it's just like super heavy autobiographical. Like, I am a mother of young children, and it's a very bodily physical experience to have young children. Like, any parent that listens to this is just gonna be like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, it's so intense before they like turn 7. Like, and maybe it still is when they turn 7, I don't know. But all just to say, having a 2-year-old and having a 4-year-old and being pregnant is really intense experience. And so like, my work is right now, it's predominantly all about like exploring that physicality and
Mm.
exploring weight and exploring just kind of like the huge paradigm shift that happens when you have children and you realize like, I'm responsible for these little lives, and oh my goodness, like, I need to keep you alive, and as well I need to keep myself alive,
Hmm.
and I need to manage you, and I need to manage me. But then like all these like existential questions of like, I don't even know how to like articulate it into words, which is probably why I make work about it.
True.
So, but it's like, if you looked at my work, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 pieces that literally have, a pregnant female as the figure,
Hmm.
for the most part, you wouldn't necessarily get that it's about motherhood,
Hmm.
until you like really kind of dug and like either talked to me or came to one of my artist talks or listened to this podcast, or like, went on my website and like, heard me directly explain it. But I kind of like that tension. Like, I don't want to corner the work into like, mothers are the only ones that can relate to it kind of
Hmm.
thing. Like, for the most part, like, we are all carrying around a huge weight. Like, we're all managing crazy things in life, especially now.
Yeah, so true.
With the pandemic, obviously, and with COVID, and then, but even before that, it's like, you don't know whose mother is sick. You don't know
Hmm.
whose father just passed away. You don't know who has a special needs sibling. You don't know who is deaf and exploring that in their work. Like, you don't know what people's interpersonal stuff is necessarily. And so, for the most part, again, it's like, we all feel flipped upside down at different times, and almost kind of like the experience we're going through is birthing ourselves, and like, you're really becoming who you're meant to be, kind of thing. And so, in a way, I kind of like that I'm experiencing all of that through the lens of motherhood right now.
Hmm.
But I like that my personal experience through the maternal experience can also relate to like somebody else's experience just through wherever they are kind of in life. It's kind of like
Yeah.
they can almost impose themselves on my work, even if they're not a mother. Essentially, I guess, is my point, kind of thing. But loads of themes of birth and postpartum and weight and physicality and movement and, kind of like crashing and labor and
Hmm.
domestic life. Like, it's like there's loads of themes there. But again, when you look at it, it seems decently open-ended.
So how do you actually go about starting a piece?
Mm, Well, that's changed a bit over time. When I was at Micah, I definitely was one of those classic people that would like, go to we had thesis from like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. essentially. And and so I would like go and I would kind of like look and I kind of would sit and I kind of would like, just kind of like think a lot. Um, I definitely hit this point probably without going down like this huge personal timeline, but um I definitely hit this point like a couple of years after college where it was like I was overthinking everything and like I almost was getting stuck like in this conceptual hole and like it's like as you and I have talked before, like it's just like the heaviness and the mental
Oh
load that
yeah.
your work is like starting to take on. It just like hit a breaking point. And so my husband and I at the time actually moved to France. We like jetted and we're just like, I'm going to go do this art residency and just kind of like leave behind all of this baggage. And we went on this crazy trip. And for almost 2 years, we were gone.
That's amazing.
And it definitely was super amazing. I'm super thankful for that experience. And then when we got back, I got pregnant by surprise with our daughter. And how I approach my work and how I start my work just like also took a huge shift
Hmm.
because I didn't have the time anymore to just like sit in my studio and think about my work all the time. Like it's
Right.
like I got interrupted by a breastfeeding baby, or I got interrupted now by a tantrum throwing toddler. Like, it's like because I have decided to allow them into my studio practice, like I also need to be flexible with like how I go about my process because again, I refuse to let them be a true interruption. I really want to learn like how to do this like studio dance with them.
Hmm.
Which like not everybody wants to do that and that's totally fine. Like that's
Yeah.
just how I want to do it.
Hmm.
And so for the most part, like I do a lot of my thinking now, like when I'm at home and when I'm doing a bunch of just like classic like parenthood duties, the kind of like the mindless ones, like I don't know, pick one off the top of your head, honestly, like a mindless domestic task that has to do with children. Like, obviously, I'm not literally thinking about that as I'm doing it. I'm thinking about my artwork and
Hmm.
like, I'm thinking about, what my husband and I need to take care of later that day. Like, and so a lot of like that kind of pre-meditative process that needs to happen before starting a piece like just happens at like all these kind of other crazy times during the day.
Yeah.
And so then I get to the studio and I'm just like, well, let's bust ass. And like I just start like cranking out all this stuff. And like, I've thought about my composition for like hours before I was actually able to get to the
Mm.
studio. So it's like I'm just like ready to like, let's lay this out, let's bust it out. Like, I usually use myself as my reference photos because who can afford a model and I'm always available for myself.
Right. Right.
So a lot of the figures in my pieces are actually me. And it's actually a little side note. You can always find my children doing really bizarre things in the backgrounds of the photos. So I almost want to like display my reference photos like as little pieces in an exhibition one time, just to,
That's
like
amazing. I would
I
love
know,
that.
just to like show the narrative. Like, but I just like quickly set up a tripod and I like just my kids are so used to it by now.
Hmm.
So like they're kind of doing their thing or just being crazy. And I'm like taking these reference photos. And then like I just quickly, and then it's just again just like busting. So like then I like, quickly shoot it to my phone so then I can have my phone right there as like I'm like laying out the my phone as my technically my printed reference
Hmm.
photo. Um laying out like the composition and then I mean by that point it's like you've started your piece. It's just kind of like, then it's like all the fundamental
Hmm.
stuff like laying out form and structure and blah blah blah. And
Do you
that
find it difficult to work from the phone? I find it so hard to work from the phone.
yeah, it's one of those like we My husband and I are just talking about like maybe we should get a printer. It's like kind of like old school thought, it feels like. But yeah, like for the most part, it's like a lot. I'm a much more tangible person too. I don't find it very enjoyable to work on the phone, but
Mhm.
again, it's like really fast and like, it's like I have like a link. I'm like so not tech savvy, but somehow my camera can send a photo to my phone.
That's
And
brilliant.
like, so it's just like I can get a reference photo in 5 minutes if I
Mhm.
work off my phone versus like doing it the way that I probably really wanted to do it.
Right.
Um, and again, it's like those little like logistical studio things that I'm like, I don't have time to waste on this. Like, I'm just gonna like use my phone and maybe one day I'll get enough money and I can get like a big iPad or something and try and look like I'm like really cool. but um but yeah, and then like a piece usually hits the classic like I hate this kind of phase. Like, I'm like halfway through working through on it, like most pieces do for most artists, or I kind of think like, oh my gosh, am I getting too heavy with this? Like maybe I should like add some humor. And I consistently try to approach like the themes that we were talking about just a minute ago, like essentially like they always kind of end up reflecting like this tension between like what's really comforting and what's really aggressive.
Mhm.
And that's like one of the biggest and weirdest tensions that I've experienced within the maternal experience. Like even like birth itself is like this amazingly spiritual experience, yet it's like so raw and so intense, and like literally you're tearing and literally you're like
Yeah.
then immediately deflating afterwards. Like it's just this such a bizarre experience, but then it's also like so tender, and like your skin is like super soft afterwards, at least mine is, but then it also feels like so rough. Like it's just like these crazy paradoxes, and like all of this like just like this strong tension between what's comforting and what's like aggressive. And so I'm like constantly trying to like unfold that and
Uh-huh.
like kind of figure it out. So a piece always goes through like again like a creation story of its own. It's like I get like really aggressive with it and I'm just kind of like, I hate this, and I'm like scratching at it and like et cetera, et cetera. And then other times I'm like, no, oh, it's so soft and like I really like it and it's like going really well and like
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. But it's like this really weird process. I'm sure every artist has like their own ups and downs with their pieces. Like,
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you kind of describe that process because I feel as though your work has a lot of ease to it. It feels as though it just kind of unfolded, and maybe that speaks to the meditation that goes in beforehand.
mm,
But then there's also kind of a nice tension between the positive and negative spaces.
mhm.
Can you speak to that weight within the piece and how you're making those decisions?
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's nice to hear that the pieces seem to have some ease. Like it's almost like you don't want that angst to come across like too much again, as you and I have spoken about before. But yeah, so it sorry, excuse me. Kind of like the empty spaces that I leave kind of started originally conceptually, because I really actually kind of felt like I didn't have any clue what I was doing with trying to like portray like such a huge like conceptual thing.
Mhm.
Like, I'm going to make work about motherhood, and you're like, okay, so I'm going to speak to like what every woman has potentially, actually better yet, what every person has experienced, because we all come from a mother.
Mhm.
Like we all have one, and we all like have like very different experiences with either the mother we came from or the grandmother we came from or the sister that was like a maternal figure to us or an aunt that was like one, or being a mother ourselves. Like it's a very loaded
Mm-hmm.
thing, I feel like. And so I kind of like hit these moments where I was like, I'm sorry, but who the heck am I to like try to speak to this? And so then once I kind of like got over that, I was like, you know what? No, like I'm a mom, and my work has always been autobiographical, and I'm just going to speak to what I'm experiencing. But I kind of wanted to like portray a little bit of that like humility in a sense, kind of like this emptiness, and kind of feeling like it's like I actually don't know how to fill in these lines, like
Right.
I don't know what I am doing. And like I'm always learning and discovering. And even with like bringing my children to the studio, I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, people like message me on Instagram and they're like, how are you making it work? And sometimes I just want to message them back and be like, I don't know. I'm just kind of going with it. And like, I have an intentionality behind my systems, but it's like you're just constantly kind of like shooting in the dark, it feels like, as you're trying to figure it out. And so a lot of the times I'll mostly leave like the hands or the shirt like empty, I guess is what I always call it, but just kind of these contours.
Mm-hmm.
um and that's to kind of like show kind of like how I feel like, yeah, I'm being equipped along the way. And like, because I'm an artist and I'm very, very tactile, it always kind of feels like things like I feel confident in them when I can grab them by my hands. And like when my hands are empty, like I'm not usually the most confident. And so like that usually conceptually is there. Or like the shirt, it's kind of like trying to portray like these different like almost kind of like layers that I'm putting on. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they make sense and sometimes they don't. And so sometimes I want to fill them in and sometimes I want to leave them empty. And then I'll also admit that occasionally it's just a design decision. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like one area of the drawing is getting like way too heavy. And so I want to balance it out by leaving like something kind of more like contour line work and stuff. But I did just complete one piece that's titled Don't Fall in the Soup and Shifting Perspectives. And it's this giant drawing of Legos that,
I've seen this. Yeah.
yeah, and it has absolutely nothing and everything to do with Legos. Like, it's like on one hand, I'm like, this drawing is not about Legos. Do not ask me about Legos. And then on the other hand, I'm like, oh, it's about Legos. It's all about Legos. so
This
as
this kind of reminds me of this one. I watched an interview with Damien Hirst, and he's a character to begin with. But someone was interviewing him about his big shark and formaldehyde, and
mm-mm.
he said when someone comes up to him and they're in the gallery and they'll ask him, they'll be like, "Oh, this is just a metaphor for death," and he goes, "No, this is a shark in a tank of formaldehyde. That's
Yeah.
it." And then someone comes up and
He's
they're
like,
like,
no, this
"Oh,
is
it's."
literally what it is.
Yeah, and then someone comes up and they're like, "Oh, this is just a shark in a tank of formaldehyde," and he goes, "No, this is a metaphor for death."
Yeah.
It's that back and forth.
It's a banger, right? And on one hand, you can be like, geez, Damien, like, stop being such a jerk. Like,
Yeah.
you're like totally messing with people. And then on the other hand, you're like, oh no, I get it. Like, it's like, oftentimes, like, things have everything and nothing to do with everything and nothing.
Yes, yeah.
That kind of thing. But yeah, that piece for me was like it was a huge breakthrough piece. Honestly, I just finished it a couple of months ago, maybe even just a month ago, and it kind of felt like I keep saying that I like broke this self-imposed glass ceiling,
Mhm.
and like finally figured out this language that I was trying to work out, like this again, like that tension between like something that's comfortable and something that's aggressive and something that's like really smoothly done and then something that's like literally just you're just hacking at it kind of thing. And that one piece is probably the one piece where I the sorry, excuse me, that one piece is probably the piece that it was the most instinctual with like
Mm.
what was left as contours and what was filled in, and then like when like these abstract marks kind of came in at the bottom. And it's like, if anybody asks me like, why was this Lego not realistically rendered, I'm gonna be like, it just wasn't. like it just was all purely instinct. Like, this one's filled in, that one's empty, this one's filled. It was almost kind of like this puzzle that literally just ended up fitting itself together. And granted, it took me almost the entire pandemic. I started it at the very beginning of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I just finished it a month ago. So pretty much the entire first year of the pandemic.
Wow.
Like, it took me the longest piece, or the longest time. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I would hope that it would have the most instinct behind it, I guess, is the reason I'm saying that.
Now, correct
But
me if
yeah.
I'm wrong, but are some of your children's drawings making their way into the work?
Occasionally, they're not actually drawing on my pieces.
Okay.
I usually end up setting up this like ginormous piece of paper for them right below my drawing. And not to say that I won't maybe one day invite them to like literally, actually, I did that just today in the studio. My son, I laid on, I have a show coming up at Plainsight, DC. Shout out to them because they're super innovative and amazing women to work with. And yeah, I like laid down this piece because I wanted to get the charcoal to have a darker tone, and you can't get that when the piece is vertical because the charcoal just falls off when you're working with the powder. And so I laid it on the ground, and my son is usually very independent in the studio. I'm super blessed in this way. Like, he doesn't let me touch his artwork, and he just likes to do his own little circle drawings, and he's doing his own thing. Like, he's 2 years old and he's like, I know what I'm doing. Like, and he doesn't want me coming near him. So I have no hesitation to like lay my drawing on the floor. Right when I did that, he came over and he was like, Mama, my turn, Mama, my turn. And I was like, all right, dude, let's try this for the first time. Like, so I gave him the brush, and I told him his little area that he could like, like kind of like swat at and like all this kind of stuff. But until today, for the most part, yeah, I like to give them these super huge pieces of paper because I work super large scale for drawing, and I like them to feel like, they have an equal place next to me with their equally as large drawing as mine. And so I put them right below it. And then the thing that is working into my work is like an observation of their mark making. And so I like watch them, and I like collect all of their drawings. Like, I'm totally that art mom that just like hoards their kids' artwork at this point, because for the most part, it's a big part of my research. And it's like, I want to kind of like the way that they consistently like the way that their hands work is so much more directly related to the way that their brain works than us as adults. I feel like obviously we've gone through training and we've gone through like maturing, quote unquote, and like we've lost a bit of that like instinctual relation between our hand and our mind. And so like it's really bizarre. Almost the way that they like make marks on the paper is the same exact way that like they annoy me through the day. It's and like they get at me in the way that they like move through the house. I'm like, how are you walking the way that you draw? I don't understand like
That's amazing.
how that's happening. And so I like to collect their marks because it's actually hugely reflective of like how my maternal experience with them has been in this kind of like bizarre metaphorical and literal kind of sense. And so my daughter is the one that's been like so far doing it the most, like drawing the most, because she's older. And so I'll totally collect her drawings, and then I like try, it's almost like I'm making an observational drawing of their kid drawing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I when I was at Micah getting my MAT, I went and observed a preschool class, and
Mm,
we're sitting there drawing with the students, talking to them about what they're doing, all this kind of stuff. And there was one little girl that I was partnered up with, and we're going through these drawings, and she's very specifically drawing
yeah.
circles like this on
Yeah.
certain areas of the page. And then she had like a stack of 6 pieces of white computer paper that just had these circles in very specific spots. And
Right.
I asked her, well, what are you drawing? And she had this whole backstory about what was happening, and she started to
That's
refer to
awesome.
each drawing as her poems. And
Oh, that's awesome.
so as she's talking about the poems, she started talking about Miss Womp, who lives in a swamp and has all this kind of stuff happening around her. And then I realized that the circles were the spots that images would go in the book that her mom reads her every night.
Oh,
And the
wow.
open
Yeah.
spaces were where the words were supposed to go. So
Oh my
she was
goodness.
literally putting the layout of the book and
Oh, that's
recreating
crazy.
that book. So it's
Isn't
such
it
a amazing
insane?
kind of connection that starts to happen.
Yeah, it's like the way that their minds work. I'm
Mhm.
just like, it's just it's again like it's so literal, but then also it's just like when we try to apply like how we think literally, it doesn't work.
Mhm.
Like it's almost kind of like it has this abstraction to it, but then when you again, yeah, you like ask them to explain something, it's like, oh well, duh, it's this. Like it's a
Yeah.
very literal explanation. And like after they explain it, you're like, oh, I see it now. But like when you just look at it without that explanation, it just is like, this is so like just all over the place and amazing. And I love that. That's really cool. Yeah.
So in addition to your kind of studio practice where you're making stuff to be seen in galleries and all that kind of stuff, you also work on murals. How did that come about?
Yeah. I so I'm trying to think like quickly the first I can't really remember actually the first mural that I did. How sad is that maybe? But yeah, I think it probably was when I was at Micah. I took a community engagement class. And one of the projects was that we partnered with a nonprofit and we like had to create some sort of like interactive art piece for that nonprofit. And so for the most part, everybody chose to do a mural. Um, and so like that was really cool. And I really liked that and kind of logged it into my brain. But then I guess it was really just kind of at the same time that Instagram in like 2012 or so was like starting to blow up a bit. I'm laughing
Uh,
because it's like right when we graduated from college, it was like this blow up of Instagram and it totally shifted everything.
oh yeah.
But yeah, Instagram was becoming a thing. And so then obviously you're getting like this first taste of just seeing all of this work from around the world that is happening like right now, like
Hmm.
contemporary work. And like that's one of the biggest cool like the coolest and biggest blessings of Instagram and social media is that like you can see what like someone in France is doing in their studio right now,
Hmm.
like kind of thing. And so I started to see like all of these street artists that were not doing like the classic street art, like not doing classic graffiti and not doing for the most part very graphic
Hmm.
looking stuff, but it was almost like they were doing fine art but out on the streets. And that like super intrigued me. I was like,
Hmm.
oh man. But for me, it was more so like, I want to paint that big. Like that would be so cool. Like I just like did one of my paintings on like the side of this giant building and like that would be amazing. But along with lovely Instagram usually comes a lot of insecurity.
Uh-huh.
So I like, fell into a lot of like the Instagram comparison trap and like who's liking my pictures and who's not, and like just all of that like stupid stuff. And so that's one of the main reasons that one of the main personal reasons why we moved to France was because I really wanted to kind of like again like just let go of all that baggage and just
Uh-huh.
actually do something like for myself. And like, it's like I had at that point, I mean, that's like probably fast forward almost 2 years since like, initially seeing that kind of stuff on Instagram. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna like stop just looking at it on Instagram. I want to like go and do it. I want to try and do it. So I got this urban art residency, and kind of like tried to jump in with the wolves. And like I never ended up doing anything super huge, like nothing that I actually couldn't do probably just on a canvas. um, but it definitely was like super invigorating, and kind of this whole other thought process behind doing mural work than doing like studio work. But I guess backing up a bit, before we moved to France, I actually, right after graduating, I did get a job with a commercial muralist. And so I did like a bunch of, yeah, just commercial murals with her. And we like did like a kid's dental office. And like,
That's
like
so fun.
it actually was pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's like painting, like cavity wizards and like Captain Smile. Like the
Yeah.
the dental office had branded like and copyrighted all of these like characters, these like illustrated characters. And then we got to like make up all these scenes and like make up all these landscapes. And so anyways, yeah, so I did do that for a bit, some commercial murals. And but yeah, moving to France was probably the biggest experience of like really trying to put my fine art out onto the streets and kind of like playing with all of that idea. But it's funny you bring it up because I just made a post about that work on Instagram, because I don't really like talk about it very much because it's not what I'm doing literally right
Right.
now.
Yeah.
And I kind of got me reflecting on it, like, will I ever do that like here in the States? Like the culture is very different, here
Mm-hmm.
in the States than over in Europe. And so I don't know if I will or if I won't, but for the most part it was, yeah, kind of a fun experiment to kind of like throw my stuff on walls and think I was some sort of badass street artist for a season. Yeah.
So since I have the opportunity to have you here, I want to ask you specifically about one piece that is just my favorite piece of yours. And you have your arms over your head and you're pulling a shirt over your head or off of your head, and the collar's kind of stuck around your head. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Can you speak to that piece a little bit?
Yeah, so far it's still in the sketch form. It's actually a sister piece to another piece. The shirt is like actually goes over my head, and I look a little bit like stuck and suffocated in it and stuff. It's the piece where like the figure is also pregnant, correct? That's the
Yes.
one
Yeah.
that you're, yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's these twin pieces that I wanted to do. Um, really kind of funny because a lot of people, like, it really sticks out to them. And it was one of those pieces where I was like trying to be, or I guess rather I'll say again, like the context. My son had just been born. We have 2 kids so far. I'm pregnant with our third. And he probably was only like 4 months old. And I had 2 under 2. So my daughter had only just turned 2. And it was extremely overwhelming. And I was trying to still like get to the studio and like, I felt a little bit of this pressure of like, I can't be knocked out of the game, which like I've let go of that at this point. But like at that point, I was still like, I got to get into the studio, blah, blah, blah. And so I was trying to be like super conceptual and like trying to like, again, like almost like quote unquote, make something like worth something. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even know like all of that weird artistic pressure that we feel. But one day I was just like, you know what, screw it, this is how I feel. And I like threw, like I had this like striped turtleneck on, and I like threw it over my face, and my daughter got super confused and was like, what's going on? And I like clicked the camera and like made this photo happen, and like just like literally just wanted to like disappear from everything. And so then I was like, wow, this is awesome. Oh, you know what? No, I was pregnant with my son. That's why the figure is pregnant, because it's me. Right. So like he was just about to be born. It was like my last month of pregnancy. Again, all those feelings were still the same, but I just had my timeline off a little bit. And so yeah, I like threw the turtleneck over. My daughter got super confused, and then I was like, I'm just gonna draw it, and I'm gonna draw it super huge.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that. My son ended up being born a little bit early, so my daughter and I were in the studio the day before he was born working on that piece. And then I finished it after he was born. And then as well, I think that last studio day that I had is when I took the reference photo for the one that you're talking about. So I also, like, once I calmed down a little bit from my own tantrum, honestly, I started like actually thinking about like, again, like all the themes, I don't have to repeat it, but like all the themes that my work deals with, like I started like thinking about all that stuff. And I was like, you know what? Like I also feel a bit like this. And I kind of like tried to like, I turned on the timer on my camera and I like tried to like take my shirt off, which dude, let me tell you, trying to get your shirt off when you're 9.5 months pregnant is ridiculous. Like trying to put socks on when you're 9.5 months pregnant is ridiculous. And so I tried to like get my sweatshirt off, and I was like, you know what, this is hilarious in its literalness, but also this is really how I feel right now. Like this is all like so complicated, and like, you know, the weight is, everything in my work is mostly about weight. Like it's just like I've got this huge weight on my front. I feel this huge weight and pressure on my back. I feel like I've got this metaphorical weight all over my head, like, and all over my shoulder. And I'm like wrestling with it in a sense. And like, you know, any mom will probably tell you, or really any parent will probably tell you, like, I don't want to do this half the time. But then at the same time, I so want to do this. Like, it's such an amazing work to do. And so like that piece is what that's all about.
I love
But
that.
I haven't actually gotten the time yet. Right now it just exists on the small scale. I made a monoprint of it, is what I think that you've seen. And so I like, it's still, I think about that piece almost like every other month. And I'm like, it'll come out when it's meant to come out. Like, I just need to like carve out the time on one hand. And on the other hand, it's almost kind of like it hasn't yet been the time to like make that piece. So hopefully soon that piece will get made like to the scale that I really wanted to be made. But yeah, most of my work is kind of like I'm trying to kind of be a bit humorous in the way that I'm trying to like really just express like wow, this is hard.
I love that. I love that. So if there is kind of one piece of artwork that you have to see in the world before you die, what is that one piece of art?
Oh man, this is like the who's your favorite artist and remember their name question. To be fully honest, I feel like I would, you know, try to think of this like really most amazing institution that I could go into, or like private collection that I should go into. But I think that probably it wouldn't be so much like which piece would I like have to see. It would be which piece would I have to see again. And
Mm-hmm.
it would definitely be Andrew Wyeth. He has an entire collection. I think the museum is called Brandywine,
Mm-hmm.
up
Yeah.
in Pennsylvania. Yeah, and it's like Andrew Wyeth has been one of my favorite painters. Like ever since I was a kid, I've been always super fascinated by just like the essence of life, honestly, that he captures, and just like the rawness, or like I just love everything about his work. And my husband, when we were first married, took me up on like a surprise trip up to his grandmother lives like really close to there. So we went and we
Okay.
visited her, and then on our way back we stopped by the museum, and I was just, it was one of those like, oh my gosh, I'm blushing as I'm like walking through the exhibition, because it's like I'm seeing in real life these paintings that I've only ever like seen in books.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when you see it in real life, everybody knows, like you see the texture and you see his brushstrokes and you see how it's made, and it's totally amazing. And there's this one piece, I'm so terrible with names, I can't remember the title of it, but it's a piece of like all of these people doing that ribbon game around the pole, and
Uh-huh.
it's like a snowy day, and so like the whole painting is white, and you just have these figures like dancing around, and it's huge and it's amazing, and I died when I saw it. And so I would totally 1000% like, last request, go back to Brandywine, die in front of that piece, literally.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I love his work. Yeah.
So I have to ask you, what is milked and what is pint?
Yes. So Milked and Pint, they're kind of um they're like sister projects, but one is printed literally and the other one is digital. So Milked is a printed publication that I started in 2019. And actually, since you're based here in Baltimore too, you'll know the Grit Fund.
Mm-hmm.
They came out in like 2018 or 2019, around then, and it was their first round of applications. And they listed, I think because it was one of their first rounds, they gave tons of examples of like projects that they would be willing to give grant money to, and they listed a publication as one of them. And I've had a dream of making a publication since high school. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
on the yearbook club, and I like,
Yeah.
I like made my own sketchbooks, and like totally that book nerd, and like, did all that fun stuff. And so I always wanted to do a magazine and a publication. But again, it just never actually came to being. And then when I became an adult, I was like, could I make this dream a reality?
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw the Grit Fund, and they were like, yeah, we'll fund publications. And I was like, oh, now's the time. And so I applied, totally did not get the funding. Totally. And but I had asked one of my best friends, who's an amazing graphic designer, who's also a mom, if she would want to design it with me. And so I texted her like, oh, we didn't get the funding, and she's just like such a badass, and she was like, let's do it anyways. And I was like, yes, let's do it anyways. And so it's a publication that features 12 artists at a time, that are making work also about the maternal experience. So the artist doesn't have to be a mom themselves, but I really want the work that the publication shows to be like investigating kind of the maternal figure or the maternal experience to some extent, and kind of as a way to just like, I think that motherhood is portrayed a lot actually in art history. Obviously, we all know that it's mostly portrayed by male artists. And so I'm not necessarily trying to throw up like a middle finger to any of that kind of stuff, but I do want to see, since since women are more prominent in the art industry now than it was then. I know that, we still have a ways to go many people think. But at least in comparison to the past,
Mm-hmm.
we have a more of a presence now. And so I just want to ask, like, so from the female perspective, like what has this been like for you, either literally as a mother, or again, we featured one artist that was not a mom, but like she had like a huge maternal experience with her sisters, and
Mm-hmm.
with like other family members that took that role in her life. And so she really related it to like sisterhood and stuff. And then as well, my friend Darren is her name. My friend and I are really trying to ask, like, how can motherhood also relate to like race and identity and religion and like all of these other kind of big like spheres of life. Everything's always really connected if you think about it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, how is motherhood related to those things? Like, even like the idea of like, quote unquote, the artist portrait.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that through the lens of motherhood? So essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take like these really specific themes in the art world, actually, like the artist portrait, or like the female nude, or like these huge themes that we learn about in art history, and I want to filter it through the lens of motherhood, if that makes sense.
Brilliant. Yeah. And so that's Milked. That's the big
Yeah,
publication.
that's the big thing. So that's like a publication that comes out like about 3 times a year is what we're doing so far. And then Pint is kind of like the bi-monthly. We started it as monthly, and then I couldn't keep up with that type of production. So we turned it to bi-monthly. And it's like the digital version essentially. But I wanted to make it still kind of like its own wonderful thing. So Pint only features 2 artists at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And it like dives really deep into like a series of work that they've created. Rather than Milked, the printed publication features about 3 pieces from each artist. And so I really want Pint almost to kind of be like a 2-person show, essentially. And then
Okay.
Milked, the magazine, is almost like a group exhibition kind of thing. So Pint, will have like 10 images from a series of work that each artist has created, along with their artist statements, along with their project statements, and like written content. I write almost like a critical review of their work,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. Versus in Milked, I don't include any of that. There's no artist statements and there's no project statements, because I really want the work to just speak for itself. And
Gotcha.
like, yeah, just kind of be mostly visual. It's a very visual publication. So yeah, Pint is online. It's a downloadable zine essentially.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. I think that's brilliant. I'm
Yeah,
with you
it's
on the
fun.
not being able to keep up. I'm having a hard time keeping up
Yeah.
with weekly podcasts.
Oh
But
my gosh. It's like when you actually like get on the other end of like producing something like that, it's like, oh my gosh, this is why like people have teams, and like
yeah.
this is why like this is like totally an industry, totally in and of itself. So I think that we all need to, especially during this time, take a bit of pressure off of ourselves.
Mhm.
So if you can't produce a podcast on each week, Jeremy, go ahead, take a week off.
And speaking about experiences and advice that you may have for someone, I like to ask this question to everyone that's on the show. What is one piece of advice that you have received over your career that you would like to pass on? And what is one piece of advice you would like to give to a up and coming generation of creatives?
Yeah, those are good questions. One piece of advice that I've received that that comes like to my mind right away actually came from my very good friend who is my design partner for Milked, Darren. During the time right before we moved to France, and was like really struggling with like trying to make it as an artist, and
Mm-hmm.
then the social media insecurities, like everything we just talked about. She looked at me and she was like, Lee, if you could make your perfect living room show, what would it be?
Mm-hmm.
Literally, like, only your friends and family, like, take the pressure of the art industry off of your shoulders and make your most perfect living room show. Like, what work would be in that show? And I was like, oh my gosh, like totally like blew my mind actually, and was
That's
like,
brilliant. I love
wow,
that.
right? And so I did, like, I actually ended up painting this ginormous, this was my first mural that I painted. I couldn't remember what it was. This giant lady sitting Indian style with loads and loads and loads of scarves all over her, going pretty much up to her nose. And she had the top knot. Like, it was like a total like mockery of like what the hipster style of that year was.
Huh.
But like it was like metaphorically, symbolic of like all my insecurities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something really angsty like that. And so, but yeah, I like, she was like 16 feet tall. I painted her huge. And I did that. I painted it right on the wall. I was doing a residency at the time, and the residency opened up their gallery to me to make this like quote unquote living room show, which was
Mm-hmm.
amazing of them. So I like threw up that huge mural, and I just like put up all of these paintings that, was exactly what she said. It was like my perfect living room show. And so it was like, yeah, definitely a piece of advice that I actually go back to a lot. Like when I get stuck and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like trying to like, I'm looking for other people's affirmation, and I like come back to like, no, Lee, again, like it's your living room show. Like, what would it be, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so to be fully honest, like not as a cop out, but I would honestly just pass that on
Yeah.
to other up and coming people. Like the art industry is full of pressure and it's full of competition. And I think that as artists, since it's also the way that we think,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like just quote unquote just what we make, it's also the way we think. I think that being an artist can become so closely related to your identity that you can like really kind of lose yourself in a certain way, and you
Oh
can
yeah.
kind of like lose yourself within the arts industry, and like also trying to like make it as an artist. Like, you have to be able to have just like a very strong boundary of like, my ultimate affirmation comes from myself and from from myself and my husband and God. Honestly, that's who mine comes from. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, ask yourself, like, who are the top three people that like your affirmation comes from, and then just like screw everybody else and don't try and please them, and just like make the work that you feel
Mm-hmm.
convicted to make, and just like make your living room show, and like don't try and compete. Actually, give opportunities to others rather than taking them for yourself. Is that is something I tell my daughter almost every day. You need to think about others before you think about yourself. 100%. If everybody in the world would do that, it would be a much nicer place.
I,
um,
I love that. I think that's kind of the perfect place to wrap this up.
yeah.
So, Lee, if people are looking for your work, where might they be able to find it?
Yeah, so my website is just my name, leenowell-wilson.com. And actually my Instagram is as well, just at Nowell-Wilson. And those are the main two places that I keep up mostly.
Okay, great, great. It's
Yeah,
been an absolute pleasure having you on the
yeah.
show. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
being on.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks for having me again. It was really fun to laugh and talk and just enjoy the conversation.
Everyone, if you have not checked out Lee's work yet, make sure you go and do that. And thank you all for tuning in, and make sure you tune in next week for our next episode. All right, I'll see you later.
Awesome. See ya.